Okay, and welcome back. We're going to spend some time in Japan this hour with Dr. Richard Wilcox, PhD, in Tokyo. He is an extraordinary man who has been doing the very best he can against virtually insurmountable odds to try to make the Japanese people aware of what their government is not telling them. And what it's not telling them is downright horrific. We saw the story 2 days ago that Tokyo, many parts of it, has in fact radioactive levels 25 times higher than the mandatory evacuation zones around Chernobyl. Think about that. Train stations, buildings, houses, streets, doesn't matter. It's everywhere to one degree or another, but if they're getting readings 25 times higher than Chernobyl's mandatory evacuation zones, wow. There's a lot of talk that the Japanese government in the beginning of the catastrophe a year ago, this April on the 11th, didn't know what to do. We know that. But what the talk is really suggesting is that the Japanese government was actively considering evacuating the city of, I think it's around 30 million people. Well, obviously they should have, and they still probably should have. These people are just going to get sick and die in many cases. So let's go over to Japan right now and welcome to the program, again, a man who has done a great deal to try to help over there, get the word out, Dr. Richard Wilcox. Hello, Richard. Welcome to the program.
Hello. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much.
Good to be here.
Thank you. Thank you for all you've done over there. How long have you been over there altogether?
Over 20 years.
You're a veteran, and I assume you speak the language pretty well.
Yeah, pretty well. Bilingual.
Mm-hmm.
And as the time went fast. And about a year ago, I was taking a nap on vacation here during this month and next month.
Yes.
And there was a big earthquake, and that was the beginning of quite a terrible situation.
Horrible. Well, and some would suggest that an argument can be made that that was the beginning of the end of modern Japan in some very important ways.
Yeah. I take a little more conservative attitude, but it might be my wishful thinking because I'm here, you know. So,
well,
but,
you're certainly
I think
allowed.
it's definitely grave cause for concern, and we should have to look at all of these aspects very carefully. Absolutely.
Yes, yes. How do you say "run for your life" in Japanese?
Hayaku hashire.
Yeah, I took the words right out of my mouth. Yeah. It's not a joke.
I usually shout that out my window, but nobody's listening, I guess.
No. The idea that the government can enforce and encourage and demand and receive such obedience from a population that is clearly in danger must seem almost surreal to you.
Yeah, surreal is the word. And, you know, especially I think in Fukushima, that's where the really scary levels of radiation, you know, they had to increase the level, the safety level. Before, I think it was 2 millisieverts per year was acceptable, and now they've raised it to 20.
That's crazy.
People in Fukushima are especially in danger, I think. But absolutely outside, and there are hot spots, like you noted in Tokyo. There are hot spots all over the Kanto, what we call the Tokyo area, greater Tokyo metropolitan area.
Mm-hmm.
And even to rural areas is called the Kanto region, and there are hot spots around. And I have a Geiger counter, and I've measured I've wanted to know around me too what the levels are. So,
well, our rate over here of acceptable exposure is I think it's 2 millisieverts, but you're talking 20. Mm-hmm. That's madness, complete madness.
Yeah.
You just don't do that to human beings.
And Ian Goddard's excellent video, he goes through that. Maybe you've seen it. I know you've. By the way, thank you. Your website has carried so many great articles, and I've followed those. Yeah, but Ian Goddard shows how the workers, nuclear workers in France and around the world, who receive up to 20 millisieverts, their cancer rate goes way up. And you have children, especially in Fukushima, and girls are especially in danger, who are getting, I think they're 20 to somewhere between 1 in 20 to 1 in 100 chance of getting cancer now. So that's a lot of people.
Unfortunately,
that's a very conservative,
Well, it is, and because it's bioaccumulative, because it's bioaccumulative, it's only going to get worse.
Right, absolutely.
This whole thing is amazing. When you look at the data, children now in Fukushima, in the prefecture, and others, I guess, adjacent, are not growing normally. Their growth rates have declined. The number of thyroid issues, we won't call them full-blown cancers, but obviously precancerous thyroids, through the roof compared to what it ought to be. The data is all there, that the people are being exposed to obviously potentially fatal doses of radioactivity all the time. And the Fukushima government, the prefecture, has said rice is going to be grown in Fukushima just like normal, just like we always have in virtually every rice field there. Yeah, bon appetit. What is with these people? I mean, they can't. It's like they're don't look, don't tell, and you're all going to die, right?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know the answer. But, yeah, it's a really good question. Yeah, and by the way, I think the thyroid, they measured, you know, the SKF blogger, he's done a great job. But I think he had a story on they did a sampling of Fukushima children, and 1/3 had thyroid lumps or bumps that they detected.
Correct.
And then they said, well, it's not that big, so don't worry, you know, or something.
Well, they didn't talk about any biopsies that I saw.
And you probably know more of a lot of these data than I do even, but there's so much data around, it's just incredible.
They don't know. They're not talking about biopsies about these bumps. They're just talking about bumps.
Yeah.
And that website you mentioned, by the way, we should give them credit as well. ENE News, XSKF, is run by a woman. A good friend of mine found that out, and it's a great site.
SKF run by a woman?
Yep.
Oh, wow. That's great to know. And, of course, Fukushima Diary, that young fellow, he's done a great job.
Yes, he has.
And Arnie Gunderson and a lot of other great people.
Well, there really are only a handful of people out there doing the job that the government. It's the same here. The government is doing nothing. The Environmental Non-Protection Agency won't even test anything. They're criminal in their negligence. We do know that the Pacific Ocean is contaminated now. No fish are being tested by the U.S. They won't test. They say no reason to. Well, there is a reason to, but they don't want to.
Yeah, the Woods Hole people even concluded a survey in the ocean and said, well, we found radiation, but it's not that much. It's harmless or something, which I was kind of shocked because I thought they were more critical. But
there's something going on.
They just raised the rate.
That's right. They raised the threshold.
Yeah, the threshold. Yeah. But as far as Japanese cultural issue, I mean, being here 20 years and I studied environmental issues for much of that time and did some research in that Japanese grassroots organizations and trying to get things moving. And to tell the truth, Lorraine Moret, you're a good friend, and I'm a big fan of hers. She wrote an article in 2004, which I used in many of my classes, which was about the Hamaoka plant, which is even closer to Tokyo.
Right.
And how it was dangerously situated, you know. So this could have been much worse as far as the number of people exposed. But anyway, my point is getting people to wake up. I would teach this issue to my students, and they all say, most of them say, yeah, it's crazy. Why do we have nuclear power plants in a country with so many earthquakes? And they agree. And you have a majority of Japanese who are opposed to nuclear power. And even now, most of the power plants are going to be shut down either because of the emergency or because of regular maintenance, right? And so I think by April, all of the plants will be, the power stations. A plant is something that grows out of the ground and is beautiful, right?
Thank you.
A nuclear power station is not beautiful, but...
No. There are only about, there are only 5 to 10 reactors working now at this point.
Yeah, and so the local opposition, they have to, supposedly the local community has to allow the reactors to start up again.
Supposedly.
So that'll be interesting to see. So there is opposition, but like there was an anti-nuclear rally a while ago, and 12,000 people showed up, and there are a lot of older people, and they're not really very ruckus, but what they're doing is very good.
It is good, but that's not enough. You need 120,000.
No. Yeah, or you need 1 million or something.
Precisely. You got to say no. Hold on a second, if you would.
Yeah.
We'll be right back, Richard, as we continue. Talking to Dr. Richard Wilcox, PhD, in Tokyo. Richard, the day-to-day life in Tokyo, I assume that things look relatively normal. Is there enough energy to run the trains on time? Are there power brownouts? Are there anything occurring that are obvious differences in the way life is conducted in Tokyo?
Right. After the earthquake and during the summer, there were power shortages, and so the trains ran less frequently.
Yes.
And of course, immediately after, this place, like a year ago on 3/11, this place was very eerie. It was very quiet and everything. But nowadays, everything's, quote unquote normal. Everything's back to normal, and the politicians are saying, we need nuclear power because we need all that electricity. But what was interesting was that when they had conservation and they used alternative fuel sources, they found out they didn't need nuclear power plants at all. And so that lie has been put to the test and shown to be, we don't need nuclear power in Japan. But yeah, people here are in, denial. They're going about their day-to-day lives just like they normally would have. They don't see the radiation or the hot spots. There are a lot of Japanese people who are aware that are using Twitter and tweets and things like that. There was a case in one of the wealthier neighborhoods a few months ago where the guy was just going around with his bike and finding hot spots. And so these hot spots do pop up. But where are the authorities? I'll tell you a little story. I live near a elementary school here, and just the other day I found out that they finally tested for radiation.
Finally, a year later. Jeez.
Yeah. And they didn't even test the soil. So, and I had gone around my neighborhood and checked, and their readings were similar to mine. Supposedly before the disaster, the nuclear disaster, the readings were, according to the government, about in the Tokyo area, they were about 0.035 microsieverts per hour, which is sort of a normal background radiation level, I guess. And nowadays they're about 0.08 or 0.1, depending on where you measure, how high up off the soil you measure. So the radiation level in Tokyo, not counting the hot spots, is about double what it was normally, but that's still under 1 millisievert a year. But that doesn't include all of the internal radiation from food and water and substances and air, and especially food, these kind of worries, plus all of the hot spots. And so, theoretically, it's kind of safe here, but in Tokyo, but over the long term, I totally agree. I mean, Japan they're in denial about this, and they're, they don't have just the other day they said, well, we don't know how to decommission the plant. A few months ago they said, one day they just woke up and they said, well, it's going to take 30 years to decommission the plant. And then the next day they changed it to 40 years, not telling how they came to that conclusion. And then recently there was a news article that said they are looking for ways. They don't have the technology yet how to decommission the plant.
That's right.
And
they don't know. They do not have. They literally do not have. They don't have the tech. They do not have the technology to do it.
They're still trying to invent the technology.
That's right.
And the fuel pool of reactor 4, and Arne Gunderson articulated this very well, and I trust him on these kind of technical things. But he said, they need to build a crane over that pile of melted fuel in something like they're going to have to invent a new system and build this building over it in a crane so that they can remove all of that fuel, hopefully before the next big earthquake. And that'll take years. So there's all these technical problems. And then just to finish up this thought, yesterday I saw a story that in England the world's oldest nuclear power plant is shutting down, and it'll take 90 years to completely clean up the site. And
yeah,
that's
but
normal...
Richard, to clean it up requires them to take the waste somewhere else, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You don't clean it up now the waste is going to remain dangerous for 1 million years. This is pure madness.
I totally agree. I mean, I'm just reporting it the way but even at the most understated way, just 90 years and a bunch of money. And that's a plant that didn't blow up. Look at Fukushima. It's a war zone. 4 reactors were blew up or melted down or damaged.
Right. Melted through.
I agree with you. I mean, in all of this waste, there's no way to store it, and Japan can't store waste in a nuclear, in a earthquake fault or something.
Right.
Australia sends I have a friend in Perth, Australia, and he said, well, gee, we send you our uranium. Why don't you send us back your nuclear waste? It's kind of revenge to the Australian government, because they're complicit. The countries that are exporting their uranium are happy to make money off it. And now, of course, India and China are nuking up. They want to build some nuclear plants in the future.
We got to take a break here, but you've mentioned the obvious. Japan can get along just fine without nuclear power plants. It was thought to be impossible because of the propaganda, but the impossible proved to be quite readily available. Hold on just a second, and we'll come right back.
Absolutely. Very good. Thank you.
Okay, back with Dr. Richard Wilson, PhD, live from Tokyo. Now, here's something that has always struck me as insane as anything could possibly be in terms of energy, and especially this catastrophe. The idea that all of the radioactive debris, including some topsoil, is being collected and trucked to Tokyo and burned in their high-tech incinerators. What sane human being would ever do something like that? Now, that may well be where some of these hotspots are coming from. These incinerators are spewing radioactivity up, and it comes right back down on the ground. What the heck is wrong with these people?
Yeah, very good topic to raise. And I think they do have some filters. So supposedly it captures the...
Yeah,
I know. I'm just playing the devil's advocate here. Yeah, there was one good sign that somebody, one mayor up in Miyagi, which is a prefecture north of Fukushima, said, why do we have to ship all this debris? We should just do it here. And people have been, asking the question, why don't we keep all the debris why don't they just have a spot near the Fukushima reactor where they can just dump it all?
And the answer is?
About 30 kilometers square radius, I'm sorry, not square radius, the radius, that's doomed forever. So just take all the radioactive stuff and put it there. Don't bring it down to Tokyo and burn it. The ashes are then buried in normal, not in nuclear burial places, which have special
just normal
standards.
Landfills, I know.
Like Hanford, which they did a really great job with. But
yeah, sure.
Normal landfill. And then, or in the ocean, in Tokyo Bay, under the water, where it's going to leak out as radioactive ash. So either, yes, you're right, if it's coming up and if it malfunctions and the fumes come out, or as ash, and this just insane. I don't know what to say about that.
Yeah, but this is going, Richard, this is going on all around you every day, at many locations around Greater Tokyo, and it's going to continue until the end of 2013.
I didn't know
Did you know that?
2013, right.
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
I know that many prefectures have accepted the debris and many have not. And Tokyo has, yes. In the Tokyo, I know I'm very concerned for my own health and for my family, and that's why I monitor as much as I can the radiation and everything. But it's kind of a long story. But what was I going to say there? The governor of Tokyo, maybe you heard this recently, that 300,000 Tokyoites signed a petition demanding a referendum on nuclear power. And he received that, and he says, well, I'm not going to submit this because anybody who's against nuclear power is dumber than a monkey. Those were his exact words. And so this is the guy, that the governor of Tokyo, who loves nuclear power. He's in the pocket of TEPCO. He wants nuclear weapons. And he was reelected even after the 3/11 disaster by people, older people, I think, older voters. But it's crazy. Why would people vote for this guy after he was involved with nuclear issues and knowing that this nuclear disaster happened?
This is one of those situations that suggests that if you were to go out and talk to, let's say, 1,000 people individually on the street and ask them, would you vote for this man? I would bet you that 80% would say no, and yet he won re-election?
Yeah. And it's kind of the complicated election system because the vote was split among those in opposition to him. I think that was part of the reason. So, yeah. But it's true, though, that an article I wrote last year sometime said 4 out of 5 Japanese want to see Tokyo abandon nuclear power. So I think that's pretty well established.
Well, pretty soon, if they keep up what they're doing, 4 out of 5 Japanese will have to be abandoning Tokyo.
Or they'll be, dying a younger death. Yep. So I was going to mention Dan Nocera because he's another person I found out about from your website. And, you touched on this last segment. We know we don't need nuclear power, and it's a cover for nuclear weapons development, or it's just a dirty industry that's a history of corruption. TEPCO, all of the lying and falsification, well documented. Their lax standards. They weren't ready for a tsunami. They'd been warned by Professor Ishibashi of Kobe University, a geologist, who said. He wrote a book after the Kobe earthquake of 1995, the big Kobe earthquake in 1995. He wrote a book pointing out how dangerous earthquakes and Japan's infrastructure are and nuclear power plants. He was not taken seriously. And so the Japanese experts have even warned about this. So it's, I got off my topic there. The danger of nuclear power plants in Japan is well established. People don't want them. And so Dan Nocera, that's where I was coming back to. And I'm saying, where's Dan Nocera when we need him? He's this MIT guy that supposedly, with 2 gallons of water, you can heat a house for a day using water cracking technology that's solar energy. And I don't fully understand how that works. Basically, I watch the videos and so on. But, where are these alternative energies? There's one guy here in Japan named Mr. Son who has developed, he got rich from cell phone industry, and he's trying to push solar power in. But the energy industry in Japan is a monopoly, and they don't want to deregulate it. And so they don't want any competition. They want to force everybody to buy their nuclear contaminated energy when people could have solar panels on the roofs or wind power. Parts of Japan would be northern Japan has a lot of wind, for example. That could help out a lot. And geothermal, Japan is a volcanic country, so the energy that could come from the ground itself and then tidal. So through a variety of means, they should have been developing these alternative technology 40 years ago instead of going down the nuclear path.
I agree. All right, we have to take one last break. Be right back, Richard, so hang in there as we continue getting a view of the Fukushima catastrophe from someone living in Tokyo, where they have imported the absolute worst thing they could do, all the radioactive debris, and they're burning it in there. We've talked about this before. And yeah, it's true. I mean, it just boggles the brain. How could this be? I guess that's what happens when the governor of Tokyo is, as Richard said, in the pocket of TEPCO and the nuclear power industry. Back in a minute. Okay, back and talking with a gentleman who lives right in Tokyo. He's been there 20 years, family, American, Richard Wilcox, PhD. And this is not a good story, and it so far doesn't have any real satisfactory end in sight. The idea of 30 years and 40 years, I mean, and that's not even Fukushima. The Fukushima plant, they haven't a clue about what they're going to do, and they, as you know, don't know. The chances are at least one of the three reactors is melted down, melted through the containment, eaten through the concrete, and is down into the earth below. Maybe all three of them are. Nobody knows. They don't have the ability to go down there and find out. And you've got the spent fuel pool at Building 4 hanging over at a 15-degree slant. Looks like the Leaning Tower of Pisa almost. And if that goes and hits the ground, Richard, has anyone told you what's going to happen if that spent fuel pool hits the ground?
Yeah. That Arnie Gunderson said if that happens, get out.
You're gone.
And I know a lot of people would say get out of Japan anyway, and I don't blame them for. Yeah. And maybe I'm foolish for still living here, but it's just the way it is. But yeah, if that goes, that would release, maybe 10 times more radiation than was released from the original disaster. And of course, the original disaster, about 80% of the radiation blew out east into the ocean. Whereas if it had been blowing the other way, it would have been just incredible. Just offhand, yesterday there was an article about the workers at Fukushima plant, and one guy said, well, we're treated like animals.
Correct.
And they make $80 a day or something. And he said, obviously, this is not shocking news, but there are many hot spots inside the compound there. And so you wonder about the workers. How long can they go, and how long can the place is a war zone? Recently, the press was let in again, and there was video footage and everything, and people were pretty shocked about how horrible it looks there. So yeah, everything you say is true. That it could be melted down underneath, and whatever comes of that, at the very best case scenario, they'll just be sitting down there emitting radiation for decades and decades. Chernobyl, 25 years later, that was just one reactor.
Correct.
And they still have problems with that, right, I think. But the areas around Chernobyl, some of them are devolving into dead zones. The species, the insects and the birds, from one generation to the next, their DNA is changed so that they're not able to be as strong or reproduce as well as the previous generation. And some scientists speculate, this is after 25 years, that certain areas are becoming, de-evolutionized dead zones.
They're devolving, and correct. Yeah.
So how much of that will hit? I mean, certainly around the Fukushima plant and other hotspots. There's a professor, Hayakawa, from Gunma University, and Gunma is a prefecture near Fukushima, sort of in between Fukushima and Tokyo. And he was producing maps showing where the worst parts of the radiation went. And, of course, it didn't go out in a diametrical perfect circle,
right,
as the government wanted us to believe. It didn't stay within that 30-kilometer zone. And he was, bullied and told to shut up and everything. But his maps are excellent, and it shows how the wind and the rain and different, I think snow at that time of the year too, last March, brought the radiation in different parts of Japan. So how many of those areas that will be devolved for the next 1 million years or whatever it takes, or at the very least cesium is 300 years.
You've got it. Are the Japanese still willfully and happily and blissfully eating their own rice and the fish that are caught offshore? Is it the same?
Good question. Yeah, and I've asked my students, some of them, and I said, "Do you eat the fish?" Because I stopped, and they said, "Oh yeah, I don't care." You know, somebody said that. You know,
whoa.
There's a variety of different. You know, not all Japanese are the same. You know, it depends on the person, but there is an overwhelming ignorance and blissful ignorance. Let me read a real quick. My friend Tony Boyes, whose website is called Can Do Better blog, we worked together posting articles for a long time. So if you look up Tony Boyes Can Do Better, there's a wealth of information from the last year. But I asked him recently, because he lives near Fukushima, what's it like up there? And he said, where I am, it's fairly clean, but the problem, as you know, is that there's radiation hotspots all over the place, so you can't test everything you eat. Most of the farmers seem to think it'll be a 3 to 5 year problem that'll slowly go away, and it's just necessary to bite the bullet for a while. At the same time, they also recognize that while older people who are exposed to radiation, that might be okay, but they are very concerned for the children. And what is their only option? Either to move to a different part of Japan, like to the southern islands, or what to do. And they're getting, he says they're just kind of getting used to it, you know, like you just say, hey, what can I do? So people, you know, one of the stories was at the ex-SKF blogger, she exposed that the government decided, well, if we mix the radioactive rice with normal rice, then it'll just reduce the amount. So they were going to sell that to like cheap restaurants and maybe even schools. And she was outraged by this, and as I am. You know, what kind of a criminal mentality would you sell radioactive rice to schools for school lunches, you know?
That's not the only
so I
case
can't really explain.
either.
I'm as outraged. I may sound calm or something, I don't know, but I'm deep inside, I'm so outraged and angry by this whole thing. I can't really put it into words, but
you know, Richard, I have published a number of stories about school children, preschool children, being fed, knowingly being fed radioactive food. This is inhuman.
Yeah, it is. And then they're bullied when they
don't eat it.
Speak out against it, and they say you have to do this for Japan, you know, to help the people. Well, if we want to help the Fukushima people, we should move them out of there. TEPCO should be all taken out and put into jail. And we should bring in some experts who can clean up this mess. And the government should reimburse the people who have been damaged by this. So you don't help them by eating the food to support them. I mean, that's nuts. It's hard to explain the mentality of. I don't want to sound, you know, too critical of Japanese, because there are many really good things about this country and this culture.
Of course.
But this divorce from reality, you know, harmony versus rationality, and overall we have to maintain the harmony, but when the reality threatens your very existence, then that becomes, you know, absurd.
I couldn't agree more. The idea of Hamaoka, if that plant had gone, then Tokyo would be empty right now. That would have done it. And to decommission a plant is actually a fallacious concept. It doesn't shut the plant down. It simply shifts the plant into a passive mode that requires constant maintenance forever.
You mean the parts are taken apart, but they're radioactive forever.
Of course, and then you've got all the radioactive waste, all the fuel rods there, You can't just shut the door, lock the gate, and go away. It's got to be tended. We've created literally a time bomb of 1,000,000 years until we develop the technology to someday learn how to transmute one atomic configuration into another, which someday, if we exist long enough as a species, which I doubt, we'll be able to do. It's just crazy. And over here, the people who are informed do not buy Japanese exports, especially food. They won't touch it. And yet there are still a lot of Japanese markets and Japanese restaurants, and I just don't know. I don't know.
Yeah. In the Italian, and they went to Italy, the ambassador, and said, the disaster's over, buy our food,
I ran that story yesterday. I couldn't believe it. The Japanese ambassador to Italy said, crisis over, no problem.
Yeah, that's just like the prime minister who said, we've hit cold shutdown, and all the engineers said, well, that's totally absurd. I mean, and then a few days later they found high levels of radiation and everything.
Exactly right.
I agree. The nuclear technology is so dangerous. I've always been opposed to it, and the possibilities for alternative energy are so tremendous.
They're all.
We have this insane cabal, the nuclear cabal controlling. And I know in your other programs and the other political aspects of the global order. It's used as a kind of a weapon over people. So
correct.
We're the victims of it.
Right. We have to go, Richard, but the alternative energy sources are all there. They've been warehoused. They've been shut down. We know that hydrogen from water is eminently viable. It's right there to be tapped into. We could do it, but the energy giants don't want it.
One last tiny thing. Not all of Japan is contaminated, and other regions are fairly safe, so it's not like the whole country is dead or anything, but the problem is serious enough. And thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, Richard. We'll talk to you again if that would be okay with you. I'd love to talk to you further.
I would love to.
All right. Be well.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Okay. Dr. Richard Wilcox, PhD. And there you go. As a direct look right from Japan. You won't find anything in the mainstream media here about it, folks, but here on this program and at our website, at your website, you will. Okay, thanks so much, and we'll see you tomorrow night. Okay, and welcome back. We're going to spend some time in Japan this hour with Dr. Richard Wilcox, PhD, in Tokyo. He is an extraordinary man who has been doing the very best he can against virtually insurmountable odds to try to make the Japanese people aware of what their government is not telling them. And what it's not telling them is downright horrific.